Hi everybody, I'm Brett Plotz from Inside Japan and welcome to Kyoto. I'm here with my friend and colleague Richard Farmer. And we're going to take you on a tour of some of our favorite places here in the beautiful city of Kyoto. Some places maybe you know, and some places I'm pretty sure you don't. So Farmer, come introduce yourself and let's get started.
Hello there, I'm also an insider with Inside Japan Tours, and actually Brett and myself, we started working for Inside Japan Tours at exactly the same time, about 7 years ago. Although we'd both been living in Japan for quite a long time before that, at least 5 years for both of us, I think. And up until very recently, I was living here in Kyoto. I was here for about 7 years, but I recently switched allegiances, and now I live about 45 kilometers away in Osaka. So we're going to be hopping in front of the camera, kind of taking it in turns when we come across something that we can kind of focus in on for a little while. But for a lot of today, we're going to be behind the camera, but kind of having a conversation with each other about the things that we love about Kyoto and introducing those things to you. So I hope you enjoy the tour with us today. I'm going to hand over to Brett to begin with and hop back behind the camera.
All right, thanks Farmer. Like you said, we're just going to have a conversation as we walk around, hopefully a nice little love letter to Kyoto. All right, so let's start here at Fushimi Inari Taisha. Yeah, this is the probably the most famous shrine in all of Kyoto and definitely one of the oldest. One of the highlights and one of the trademarks of this shrine are the vermilion torii gates. There are said to be thousands of these gates, and I really think they are. Farm and I have been through most of them, I think, in our careers here at Inside Japan. But what torii gates are is they are basically a symbol that you have entered a Shinto shrine. Shintoism being the indigenous religion of Japan. And what they do is they kind of demarcate the spiritual world from the material, physical world. And so this shrine here, Fushimi Inari, was founded in 710, so over 1,300 years ago. And actually this shrine was founded before Kyoto was even a thing, before Kyoto was even founded. And so this shrine predates Kyoto. And Fushimi Inari, it's in the name. Inari is the goddess of rice and harvest. And so of course a very important shrine when it comes to the Japanese people, because again, rice is one of their biggest harvests here. And rice also has to deal with money, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to slowly walk from the basically the base of the mountain down to the base of the start of the shrine itself. Oh man, a ninja! Everyone, watch out! There's a ninja right here as we're talking about Inari Shrine.
Yeah, I've got no idea what this guy's doing here, but it's fun. One thing you'll see a lot of when you're walking around Inari shrines in Japan is fox statues. And foxes are the messengers of Inari. Sometimes you'll hear people make a bit of a mistake and say that the foxes are Inari. But that's not quite right. They're the messengers of Inari. We'll just continue this way. We'll just say goodbye to our ninja friend.
Bye, ninja. Luckily, we weren't killed. So again, we're just going to walk slowly from basically the base of Mount Inari to the entrance to the shrine itself, kind of in reverse of what people normally do. And as we kind of walk through this tunnel of torii gates, you'll see they'll become denser and denser as we get to the beginning, which is for a reason, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, so just going back to why you see so many foxes, and they're the messengers of Inari. So Inari being the god of rice cultivation, for rice farmers in Japan, one thing you really don't want in your paddies and your rice fields is mice and rats. And so foxes are actually very much the friends of rice farmers. They will visit your paddy and happily eat any mice and rats that they might find. So that's a great thing. And also after they've done that, the inevitable outcome is that they will also poop in your paddy. And this is doubly good because now it becomes a fertilizer for very good crops. So this is one of the reasons why foxes have become so intimately connected with this deity of rice cultivation, Inari.
That's right, we've talked a lot about deities, and so Shinto the indigenous Shinto religion here is colloquially known kind of as the religion of 10,000 gods. There are actually more gods. They're called kami here in Japan, and those can be really anything. And that, for example, they can be nature gods. It can be, for example, the god of the river, or god of the sea, or god of the sky. For example, Mount Fuji is known as kind of the dwelling of the gods. But it also be historical people as well. For example, the emperors of Japan are considered gods in the Shinto religion. And so Shinto is kind of very, very intertwined with the other major religion here in Japan, which is Buddhism. We'll talk a lot more about Buddhism and kind of, I guess, how it fits in to Shinto when we visit a Buddhist shrine a little bit later. Of course, Buddhism entering Japan much later than Shinto, coming from India through China, then through Korea, and then here to Japan over 1,000 years ago. But back to Fushimi Inari, you'll see kind of, I guess I want to point out, again, these are the backs of the torii gates, because they're kind of going in reverse. And so you can notice kind of the markings, the black markings, which are the Japanese language. You can also see some alphabet, some of them, but what they are, you're probably thinking, what do they say? And so what they are is basically names of individuals and companies. And why that is because companies buy and donate these torii gates in various denominations, from very small to quite large, to help kind of curry favor with the goddess Inari. Well, why is that if it's the goddess of rice and harvest and cultivation? It's because traditionally the Japanese people have been taxed with rice. And so that's how they pay their taxes, with rice. So rice basically equaled money. And so that kind of becomes, this shrine was basically co-opted in the last 150 years by companies who would like to, again, curry favor with the gods. And so they buy these big torii gates with their company cash and put their names and the company name on them, which is really, really good, again, for the gods, but also as good advertising.
Yeah, I think it's hard to overestimate the importance of rice in Japan, even now. I mean, it's the staple food. A lot of my Japanese friends, they won't feel complete unless they've had rice for at least 2 meals of the day. But especially so in the past, when rice was money, to the extent that for most people in Japan, outside of the most kind of wealthy, like the aristocratic class, most people couldn't afford to eat rice. They would spend their entire lives kind of tilling the fields, cultivating this rice, but then almost all of it would be taxed, and anything that they had left over they would have to sell. And really, most people were eating kind of other grains, such as millet and things like this. Perhaps maybe on special occasions, maybe a bowl of rice if they're lucky. But yeah, this idea of rice as money was so pivotal in pre-modern Japan. Now, of course, people have this luxury of basically being able to eat rice, white rice, as much as they like.
Yes, and definitely, like Farmer said, we have eaten a lot of rice here in the country. And when you come to Japan, you know, try it, because a lot of people are very, very proud of the Japanese rice and how good it tastes. So yeah, you will be eating quite a bit of rice when you do come to Japan. But it just kind of shows how kind of the old ways and the new ways have kind of come together into an ancient place like this.
And Inari shrines in Japan, there's so many of them. What is it, Brett? About 32,000, I think. And they're second only in number in terms of shrines in Japan to shrines dedicated to another deity called Hachiman, who is a god of war.
And again, it sounds grim. Hachiman is a god of war and violence, but you got to understand that the samurai, which were the warrior class here, they did more than fight. And so a lot of times, for a lot of the history of the samurai, for example, in from 1868 till about, or from 1600 about 1868, there was really no war. It was they were just kind of isolated from the rest of the world. And so what did they do? They couldn't fight any wars really, and so they became learned. They learned. They basically spent their time on the arts. And so the god Hachiman, the god of war, is kind of again became a little bit co-opted into the god of education and learning. And so that's why there are so many shrines dedicated to Hachiman, who's also kind of the god of education. And a lot of students will come to the shrines and pray for success in tests and quizzes and the like, and for educational success.
It's pretty hot today.
Yeah.
It's midsummer in Japan now, so very hot. I think we're probably hitting about 34, 35 degrees Celsius today in Kyoto. That's quite normal for this time of year. And another thing that's very customary at this time of year is this background sound that maybe you can pick up. I'm not sure how well the mic will be picking up that background noise, but of the cicadas, the very loud insects that are so pervasive in Japan in summer, to the extent that if you watch a Japanese film or drama or even like an anime, cartoon style animated program, if the director or the producer they want to signify to the viewer that this is a scene taking place in the middle of summer, all you need to do is add in this background track of cicadas, and it's immediately clear to a Japanese viewer that this scene is taking place in summer. And there are so many different types of cicadas, all with different sounds. At the moment, kind of like the standard one, but some of them you get really great sounds. My favorite one is the one that goes hopefully we'll hear one of those at some point during our walk today. Definitely a highlight.
That's right, and that was a spot-on imitation of that particular cicada. We're ending this section of the shrine itself, and kind of going into a place with with different buildings, and we'll talk a little bit about specifics of kind of what makes this a shrine, and just one unique feature to Fushimi Inari itself. You see they're sticking with the vermilion color, which is a ward off against evil.
Yeah, that color is so important in Japan because it's seen to be the color of the sun, the same color that you find in the center of the Japanese flag, and that the sun is so important in Japanese mythology. One of the most important Shinto kami deities is Amaterasu, the great sun goddess, who was involved in the creation of Japan.
That's right. Over here, you can see this is at pretty much every temple and shrine you'll see, you'll see what's called emma. And these are basically prayer votives. And that what you can do is you can buy a piece of wood and put a wish on it, or some kind of prayer, and then hang it up here, and then hopefully it'll come true. What's unique about Fushimi Inari here is that, well, they're shaped like foxes. And we talked about the foxes before, again, messengers of Inari. And one kind of cool thing here is that they do customize them. A lot of people do. They kind of put faces, their own face on the foxes. Get this one here. It's all right. This is a scary fox. Oh, look at this one. This is just an anime character. Really good. Again, it just can customize in the way you want, and a lot of places do that. But here in Fushimi Inari is the only place that they have the fox emma. Right? And you're probably thinking, well, I don't want to buy an emma. I want to buy a gate, Brett. You want to buy a gate? Well, you can. You can buy gates that are small, anywhere from around 30 pounds or so, very, very small, all the way up to the big gate, which is around 2 million yen. So let's say around 15 to 16,000 pounds. And you say, oh, Brett, that's not that expensive. My company does millions more than that. Well, yeah, they do, right? But it's all about finding a space for it. As we enter the tunnel, this is the Senbon, the thousands of gate tunnel. Here, probably the most famous section of the shrine itself. These gates are so densely packed, you can't even put your finger or your hand in between some of these gates here. So it literally is like a tunnel. You've seen this probably in various movies about Japan. For example, Memoirs of a Geisha, which happened, probably 15, 16 years ago now. Various anime here in Japan is focused on this section of the shrine itself.
Yeah, there was one very funny scene in Memoirs of a Geisha. Well, it's funny if you know Kyoto, because the young girl, Sayuri, who's the main protagonist, she's running through this tunnel of gates, and then she reaches the end and takes like a left turn, and then boom, she's on the other side of Kyoto City in Heian Shrine. So if you know Kyoto, it's quite funny to watch. But yeah, that very famous scene was filmed just here. Really good film. Doesn't necessarily give the most accurate depiction of what geisha life and geisha culture involves, and we'll talk a little bit more about geisha culture, which is so central to Kyoto's history and tradition later on. But it's a good yarn. It's a pretty good film.
Yeah, it shows Kyoto in a good light, really. I mean, like Farmer said, it's not super realistic, and that actual geisha do not have teleportation skills. But it shows a lot of beautiful places in Kyoto, which we'll show a little bit of that a little bit later on. For now, like we said before, you could walk for hours. I was thinking for about 3 hours to get through the whole entire thing, up and back.
I think definitely in this kind of weather you'll want to take your time. I think probably, yeah, at least a good leisurely pace, 3 hours to go all around the whole of Mount Inari and all of these gates.
Well, we only have about an hour with you, and so we are going to stop it right here at the end of this section and head to our next location, which again we really hope you like, because these are places that we just like to visit in general. So hope to see you there.
Okay, we've now moved a little bit further north within Kyoto City, but we're still here on the east side of Kyoto, this area called Higashiyama, which means the East Mountains. And we're here at a temple called Nanzen-ji, and it's one of the most famous Zen temples in Kyoto. And this is probably the most famous feature of Nanzenji Temple, this enormous Sanmon, the main gate. And actually the word that's used for this gate, Sanmon, it can actually be written in one of two ways. Mon means gate, and that's always written the same way. But one way of writing the san, the initial part of the word, is the number 3. And the reason for that is because it refers to these 3 bays, the 3 entrances that you have leading through the gate. And then the other way of writing that character san is mountain. And although we're not on a mountain here, we're actually quite close to some mountains, but we're not actually on a mountain. But the reason why sometimes this gate is referred to as a mountain gate is because Buddhism in other Buddhist countries, such as China and Korea, and those are the countries from which Buddhism was introduced to Japan, in those countries, temples tended to be built on top of mountains. And so you would have a gate, the Sanmon, the mountain gate at the base of the mountain, and then you would go up a trail leading to the actual main temple itself. And so although most temples in Kyoto City aren't built on mountains themselves, often that term, Sanmon, mountain gate, is still retained, and the idea is that as you enter the temple, you're entering a kind of metaphorical mountain, a kind of spiritual realm. And like the Shinto gates that we saw at Fushimi Inari, the gate also serves that function as well, this idea that by entering the gate, as we just did, we've moved from the secular world, the mundane, into the sacred.
Right, so as we've kind of mentioned before, Buddhism and Shintoism, the two main religions in Japan, are intertwined so much that a lot of times they're the same thing. They share the exact same land, and we're only really forced to kind of choose to be Buddhist or Shinto after the 1868 Meiji Restoration. There was a kind of schism where they had to choose really what they wanted to be, and mostly it was going to be Shinto and Buddhism. So you can see if you go to a temple or a shrine here in Japan, you kind of see characteristics of both. Well, you know it's a quite old one then at that point.
Just looking back at the gate now that we've come through it, one other thing that this gate is very famous for is a kind of story about a historical Japanese figure called Ishikawa Goemon. Brett, who's Ishikawa Goemon?
Ishikawa Goemon was a historical figure, a famous guy, basically, roughly, Japan's Robin Hood, in that he stole from the rich and gave to the poor. He was a thief, but unlike the, I guess, happy ending of Robin Hood and Maid Marian, Ishikawa Goemon was, again, a real guy, but he was also an assassin. And so he was eventually pinched because he tried to assassinate the leader of Japan at the time, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and him and his son were boiled alive. But before that, he came here to do a little something. What do you do, Richard?
Well, so this part more goes into legend, but there is a scene in a very famous kabuki, Japanese theatre, kabuki play called Ishikawa Goemon. And the kind of pivotal scene in that play opens with Ishikawa Goemon sitting up on the balcony, the kind of second level that you can see in the Sanmon gate. And the lights come up and he's sitting there smoking his long kiseru tobacco pipe. And he looks out over the scenery of Kyoto and says the kind of pivotal like a line of that play, kind of like the equivalent of Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou? And he surveys the scene and says, "Oh, what a beautiful view!" And that's the moment that everyone has been waiting for. And then he follows that with a very typical thing that happens at pivotal scenes in kabuki, which is called a mie, which means like cutting a pose. And so he'll say the line, and then basically does this kind of wobbling of the head and crossing of the eyes, which shows like intense emotion. So like, oh, what a beautiful view! Like this. This is my really bad attempt at imitating kabuki. But kabuki is a wonderful thing to check out when you're in Japan. Sometimes quite long kabuki performances can last for 3 or 4 hours, but you can actually get one-act tickets. And there's a very famous kabuki theatre in Kyoto called Minamisa, where you can watch kabuki performances. I highly recommend watching the pros do it, who are much better than my impression just then. Let's continue walking this way over to the main hall.
I think you need to give yourself more credit, Farmer. That was better than a lot of amateurs. I mean, you got everything down, the accent and all, that the historical Goemon did have. But yes, if you do come to Japan, please at least try out one act of kabuki, because it's something, again, uniquely Japanese that you can only do here, and that's why you travel, right?
Yeah, and so we're now coming up on what's called the Butsuden, which means the Buddha Hall. And this is often thought of as the heart of the monastery, where the main ceremonies take place, the really important ceremonies. Some happen on the kind of annual basis, like really big events that happen, for example, on the Buddha's birthday in April. But also some ceremonies take place on a daily basis, often at what I call Buddhist o'clock in the morning, which is really very early. Zen monks will often rise around 4 o'clock in the morning, and that's when the daily schedule in the Zen monastery will begin, with morning meditation followed by a morning service, breakfast, and then manual work, for example in the gardens and in the graveyards, cleaning things up, an afternoon service, more meditation in the evening. It's really quite an intense schedule. And whenever you come to a Butsuden, a Buddha hall in the Zen monastery, it's always worth looking up, and hopefully we can do that now, because you will often see on the ceiling a very impressive dragon painting, and you can hopefully make it out here. And there's a reason why you find dragons depicted on the ceilings of Zen temples. So we often think of dragons as malevolent beings that need to be slain. And we think of dragons as fire-breathing, and usually with wings as well. Whereas in Japan, and in East Asia as a whole, the conception of dragons is quite different. They're considered to be water deities, so almost the polar opposite, not fire but water, and more benevolent as well, and they're never depicted with wings. They're more kind of serpent-like creatures. And so by having a dragon depicted on the ceiling of the most important building in the monastery, it's acting as a kind of Buddhist fire protection system. The water deity will hopefully ward off fire. As you work your way around the very famous temples in Kyoto, when you visit Kyoto, one common theme that you'll probably notice is that almost no temples can claim to be the original buildings. Most of the temples in Kyoto being made of wood in a country that's so prone to natural disasters, earthquakes, and lightning strikes and things like that. Almost all of the temples in Kyoto will have burnt down at least once during their lifetime. This is quite a common theme, but hopefully having a dragon on the ceiling stops it from happening again. And now there's also more modern fireproofing systems as well, including lightning rods as well that earth the buildings.
That's exactly right. Speaking of modern, and so you do have, again, this very, very old temple, but within the temple grounds you have a quite modern feature, which is an aqueduct. And so this is Japan's very first aqueduct. It was made in 1880 or 1890, and so just a few decades after Japan opened up to the west from 250 years of isolation. It brought water all the way from Lake Biwa to the city and to the temple itself exactly. Lake Biwa is Japan's largest freshwater lake. It's quite far away, but they brought water all the way there from here. And it was actually, fun fact, was designed by a 22-year-old Japanese architect who we use red brick, as you can see, which is a very trendy thing to do back then. There's an entire section of Yokohama, a city of Japan, which has red brick buildings dated from that time. But he actually kind of won over the committee who was doing this, because he basically said that he would take responsibility if it failed. And so he quite literally could have fallen on his sword if the aqueduct had failed, but lucky for him, it did not, and it became Japan's very first aqueduct. Quite a success story, but again, quite a interesting feature to have here at Nanzenji Temple.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see this quite unusual and unique juxtaposition of the very old and the relatively modern here at Nanzenji. Late 19th century for the aqueduct, and then the temple itself was originally built in 1291 and was commissioned to be built by the emperor at the time, Emperor Kameyama. And one part of the temple that's especially famous, along with the gate, is the building that we'll come to in just a moment or two, called the Hojo. And the Hojo means the abbot's quarters. And that's where, in a Zen temple, you'll usually find the really beautiful dry landscape garden. And often in English, people will refer to this as a Zen garden. But actually that word, Zen garden, doesn't exist in Japanese. So in Japanese, what we call a Zen garden are known as kare-san-sui, which means dry mountains and water. And the reason why they're not called Zen gardens is because, although they're most commonly found inside Zen temples, they're not totally unique to Zen temples. So you might find temples in other schools of Buddhism, Shingon and Pure Land and so on, that also have this style of dry landscape garden. So they're known as kare-san-sui in Japan. And I'm afraid we're not allowed to film inside the actual temple building itself, so we can't show you the quite famous garden here. But there is a picture of it just outside that we can show you. And what's famous about this garden is it has a kind of story. So you can see just here, there's one really quite large rock and then a number of smaller rocks behind it, and then this area of gravel represents water. And it's said that this particular kare-san-sui garden represents a mother tiger crossing a stream with her cubs. And because of that, one of the things that you'll find imagery of is in this temple is these sliding screens featuring tigers as well. So this is a kind of motif that runs throughout the temple.
And a lot of people think, well, you know, those tigers look kind of strange. And yeah, they do, because the Japanese they don't have tigers in Japan, right? What they had were pelts that were sent to them or brought back from other parts of the world, and then they had to reconstruct that creature from what they thought that it looked like, which is why you see kind of some strange drawing of elephants and other creatures around here, around Japan. So it's just kind of funny to see, like, this is what we thought it looked like, but everybody can kind of tell it's a tiger.
Yeah, really great point. If you want to see some really cuddly looking tigers, one quite famous place in Kyoto is Nijo Castle, Nijo-jo. And that's one of the best places to really see what Brett's just talking about, which is these tigers that don't really look like tigers, but they certainly do look very endearing, and they're beautiful paintings. Bright colours on their gold leaf, really stunning paintings. And this building, actually, this Hojo, the abbot's quarters, is actually a designated national treasure. Even though it burnt down and was rebuilt in the early 17th century, it's still considered special enough to have this designation, national treasure, which is basically within Japan. It's a government designation and designates the most special cultural properties that have been preserved in Japan. And also, as a second accolade, this temple is also one of Kyoto's 17 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So really quite a famous temple. So I hope you've enjoyed this walk around Nanzenji. We're now going to be heading to a slightly different area of Kyoto, but still sticking on this east side of the city. So we'll see you there in just a few seconds.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Continuing with the theme, we are still in the eastern part of Kyoto in the Higashiyama District. Higashi meaning east, Yama meaning mountains. And so this district is famous for a couple different things. One being, of course, behind me, this is Kiyomizu Temple. the Pure Water Temple. It's founded in the 8th century, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a fantastic temple to go walk into, but Kyoto has over 2,000 temples and shrines, right? Let's not go into this one, but I want to show you the other aspect of this area that is famous, and that is, well, the area itself. It's a fantastically well-preserved traditional part of Kyoto that honestly can't be missed. So follow us as we walk down this area and talk a little bit about why this area is the way it is, really. And for my money, when people think about, well, for example, people think of Tokyo, right? They think about neon lights and think about tons of people and the hustle and bustle of it all, and it does have that for sure. When people think of Kyoto, I think this is the area that they're thinking of, right? This is the traditional architecture of Kyoto with people in kimono, walking around, just kind of basically soaking up the atmosphere that this ancient city can provide you. I did talk a little bit about Kiyomizu behind us. And that temple, again, it's founded in the 8th century, has been here forever and has always been a draw for pilgrims. So we're kind of walking down here. The street is basically a pilgrim's walk. And you can see it's lined on both sides with shops and restaurants. I mean, the shops, they sell, for example, very Japanese and Kyoto-centric things like straw sandals or very kind of unique Japanese sweets and also some religious accoutrement as well, because this is a very religious city, as I said before. But people might be thinking, well, that's kind of sad that you can buy these fans here, for example, and other kind of, I guess, traditional tourist tat. But honestly, as Farmer can tell you, it's always been that way.
Yeah, so basically approaches to temples and shrines in Japan, what are called Monzen-machi, which means like the town in front of the gate. And what's being referred to here is the main gate or of the shrine or temple. Monzen-machi has been a thing for centuries, ever since Japanese people have been going on pilgrimages to holy sites. And shopping has always been a part of that. And maybe what's for sale has changed a little bit. In the Edo period, in the 17th century, people weren't buying Hello Kitty keychains and stuff like that, but local foods and local souvenirs, local crafts, those were all for sale in the Monzen-machi leading up to temples and shrines. And it's often said that to do a real pilgrimage in Japan, you need to do the 3 P's of pilgrimage. You need to pray, pay, and play. And so, of course, pray is the main reason that you're kind of undertaking a pilgrimage, but you've also got to pay, you've got to buy souvenirs like lucky amulets and talismans and local foods to take back to share with your friends and family back in your home village. And then play is just doing something fun along the way, such as visiting a kabuki theatre to enjoy a kabuki performance. So the kind of commercial aspect of temple and shrine visiting in Japan and in Kyoto, like here, is not a new thing. This has been going on for centuries.
That's right, and really any temple and shrines you go to here in Japan will have an aspect of that. That's just kind of how it is, and again, it's just part of the culture. You can see now we're walking a little bit further down what's called the Zaka, these slopes. This area is famous for, there are so many slopes down this area. We'll walk down a couple of them and kind of explain how they got their names. And you're probably thinking, well, why does Kyoto kind of have a stranglehold a little bit on these types of areas? Well, like I said before, Kyoto was one of the only cities in Japan that wasn't bombed in the war, either conventionally or with an atomic bomb, and that is for a really interesting reason. Farmer, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so of course, it's very well known that the 2 cities that were the unfortunate targets of the 2 atomic bomb attacks in the Second World War, August 6th and August 9th, 1945 in Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. These were chosen from a short list of targets that had been drawn up. And Kyoto had originally been on that list. One of the criteria for inclusion on that list was a city that up until that point hadn't been firebombed using conventional bombs. Because there was this new weapon, this new atomic bomb, what was really wanted was a kind of before and after. So a kind of fresh target that could then, really you could see how much damage this new bomb could do. And Kyoto, as it hadn't been firebombed with conventional weapons, was on that list. But the Secretary of War at the time had been to Kyoto a number of years before the war. And had been so impressed with Kyoto and its heritage and its culture. And so he actually petitioned President Truman and said, please have this removed from the list. I can't bear to see Kyoto destroyed. And that was approved, and Kyoto was removed from the list and actually was replaced with Nagasaki, which ended up, of course, being the second target. And And one thing that also remains in Kyoto is this beautiful preserved streetscapes. So one thing you'll notice is there's no overhead cables that you see plaguing so many of Japan's modern cities. There's been a deliberate effort in these areas to keep all of the cables underground and kind of preserve the traditional skyline. So a really beautiful city to kind of just wander around and soak in the atmosphere.
That's right. I mean, Kyoto was technically saved from that fate of being bombed because Mr. Stimson and his wife honeymooned here in the 20s. And so just by a twist of fate, Kyoto ended up not being bombed at all. And so the result is you still have these traditional districts. See, now we're kind of walking down here. We're going to head to the right, kind of get off this slope and head down a different slope, which is called Sannen-zaka Path. So Sannen-zaka, I said before, zaka means slope. So Sannen is basically 3 years. We're going to head right here to the right. This is Sannen-zaka Path. And Sannen-zaka, so Sannen means 3 years, zaka means slope. And so what that means basically, the story goes, it is kind of a little bit grim, but the story goes that if you lose your footing on these stairs, you will have 3 years of bad luck. And some people take it even further and say if you lose your footing on these steps, well, you're gonna die within 3 years. And so that's why we're gonna really watch our step here. Although to be fair, on tour, I think I've stumbled on these steps a couple times.
I've stumbled.
Yeah, and so far so good. I'm all right. But yeah, you can see here. I mean, this is a pretty famous viewpoint in the Higashiyama District. And if you just imagine in front of you these trees, the famous part about this area is these are basically all cherry trees. So when you're in cherry blossom season, in March, April, May, you will see all of these just abloom with cherry trees, and it's just a fantastic sight. And of course, this place will be choked with people taking pictures, but it is worth it to kind of stand in line and take a picture of this area.
Yeah, for sure. I think of all the places in Kyoto, and maybe even Japan, this is one of the most beautiful areas to come and stroll. Kind of late March, early April, when the cherry blossoms are in full bloom. Really beautiful.
That's right. And definitely top 5 for me. Top 5. The other 4 are secrets, trade secrets. But again, you can see the shops on both sides. And you have this shop here to the left, which sells just wooden-made masks of foxes and various demons, and also cats. They're lucky, like lucky cats. And then to go, I guess, even a little more traditional, this shop to our left here sells pottery. And so this area, well, Kyoto itself is famous for its pottery, but especially the Higashiyama District, the Kiyomizu-yaki, is famous for just their, I guess, how good their pottery is. Right now, it's kind of quiet a little bit. We're off the main street, kind of off the main street of a main street here.
Yeah, this guy just up here is a jinrikisha driver. So actually he uses this, what we call a rickshaw, but that word comes from Japanese, jinrikisha, which means person-powered vehicle. So with his lovely muscly legs, he will ferry people around this lovely historic district for a reasonable price, and have good banter along the way as well. Many of them can speak English and will really show you a good time for half an hour or so in this area, but I really don't envy them much today. It's probably about 38 degrees Celsius today in August. That's not an easy job to do on a day like today.
Yeah, definitely hats off to them today for doing it for sure. As you can see, as from before, the sun has come out today, so we are getting pretty lucky. It's getting sunnier and hotter as the day goes on, but we'll persevere. One thing that doesn't kind of come through this tour is, as we're walking here this entire way, we smell so much of the incense and the different sweets that have been cooking, and so it's just a fascinating kind of I guess tour, like for your eyes and your nose as you walk through here.
Yeah, some of the most prestigious incense creators are based in Kyoto, and we've passed a number of their shops, and the smell wafting out of it, this fragrant floral and woody aromas, I really wish you could smell through the screen, but yeah, as Brett says, so many wonderful smells in this area as you walk through.
I mean, Kyoto has so many temples and shrines. You smell incense everywhere you go here. Oh, one thing I do want to talk about, again, Kyoto is an ancient city, but it does have modern touches. Like, for example, vending machines. I love talking about vending machines, right? Vending machines, there are over 6 million vending machines in Japan. Anywhere from here to outside my house to the top of Mount Fuji has vending machines, and there's a lot of different reasons why they are. I mean, they are very, very convenient. They are convenient. It's less overhead for stores because they don't have to pay people to be here to sell things for them, right? But they also have even more serious reasons, and that, for example, a lot of these machines will go into free vend mode when there's an earthquake or a typhoon. That way people can still have access to water and to drinks and especially food as well during those times. Japanese vending machines are fascinating in that if you name it, I've bought it out of a vending machine my time here. I bought pizza, I bought D batteries, I bought cassette tapes. There's one time I bought, just to say I did it, I bought an entire suit out of a vending machine in Fukuoka, a town in the south. It's a terrible, basically made of tissue paper, but I bought it and I wore it once just to say I've done it. And I do love vending machines a lot. You can actually pay with cash or with cards or with your train cards. You can use them wherever you'd like. So let's keep heading this way. Again, I love talking about vending machines in the country.
Kind of interested in what that guy's choosing at the vending machine. I hope he makes a good choice. The Scal Mango Cider looked pretty good. I'm not sure if he went for it, but that would be my recommendation.
That is a good drink. There's so many different drinks in these vending machines that you could really just spend a lot of money, 100 yen at a time, really.
And then talking of sustenance, just on the left-hand side, in just 100 meters or so, we'll be coming to a restaurant, and a quite traditional looking restaurant serving a quite famous food in Kyoto called yu-dofu. What do you think about yu-dofu, Brett? How do you like it?
Well, I know that lots of people right now, we mention the word tofu and there are some eyes rolling, probably some gagged faces, but really, and to be fair, I wasn't a big fan of tofu before I came to Japan. I really wasn't. But there are so many different varieties of tofu here that you will find one that you like. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's just, a tasteless blob is what it is. But yu-dofu is different in that it has a sauce that comes with it and like a soup kind of. And that makes it basically, gives it a good flavor. But in Kyoto, because they're so famous for their tofu, because again, there's so many temples and shrines and a lot of vegetarians, right? Because of the monks. But it's really the texture and the creaminess of the tofu is what you're looking for. And to answer your question, Richard, I do like it. I'm a tofu convert now. I'm a tofu convert.
Yeah, me too. I didn't know until I started living in Japan how many different ways there were to prepare and cook tofu and how delicious it can really be. And I'm a big fan of yu-dofu too. And there are so many people in Kyoto that they don't buy their tofu at the supermarket. There will be a local neighborhood tofu shop, and that's all they produce. They only make tofu, and they make fresh batches every day, and people will make the effort to go there, daily or at least a couple of times a week to get their fresh tofu just for that day. That's how prized a product it is. You can't just buy like the regular stuff from the supermarket. You want the homemade stuff from that particular shop because that's the stuff you like.
Exactly right. We are actually coming up to, I guess, the final stop on this section of the tour, and that is the Yasaka Pagoda. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Buddhism later, but Farmer knows about this place really, really well. So give a little bit about this Yasaka.
Yeah, so maybe you can already see it just creeping into the top of the screen now, just the top of the Yasaka no To, which means the Yasaka Pagoda. It's a 5-story pagoda, Goju no To in Japanese. And there are a couple of very famous Goju no To 5-story pagodas in Kyoto. There's another very famous one at Toji, which is a temple very close to Kyoto Station. But this one has become such a famous landmark of this east side of the city. You can really see it on the horizon from many places around this area. And perhaps where we're standing right now is one of the best places in this east part of the city to view this beautiful pagoda. And this style of pagoda architecture was introduced to Japan via Korea and China. So actually, these pagodas are originally based on Indian Buddhist stupas, which were originally kind of mound-shaped structures to hold the relics of the Buddha. But after Buddhism was then introduced into Central Asia and then through to China, this style of very elegant and almost musical looking shape of this wonderful building was developed and then was introduced to Japan as well. And this has become a very famous spot in this area. And you'll often see people gathering here, and particularly at sunset, taking pictures here at sunset. You often see quite a lot of people coming here trying to get the perfect shot. But I think we're doing pretty good right now.
Looks all right to me. I mean, this is, like Farmer said, a 5-story pagoda. There are very few kind of original 5-story pagodas left in Japan because, like we talked about before, with lightning and earthquakes and things. But originally, stupas were meant to, I guess, encase or hold one of the physical pieces of the Buddha. That's right, right? Where like a fingernail or a tooth or something like that.
Yeah, often teeth. But if the Buddha had had as many teeth as there are pagodas claiming to have teeth of the Buddha inside, he would have had some dental problems, that's for sure.
He'd have been a shark, part shark. Well, right now we're going to stop here and we'll head to the next part of the tour, which honestly is a place that probably no one has ever heard of, and it's one of Farmers and I's favorite places to show people around. It's a little bit different, and so please join us there.
Okay, we've now moved up into the northeast corner of Kyoto City, into this area called Tanukidani Fudo-in. It's a bit of a mouthful, but what that means is Tanukidani is the name of this valley, and it means raccoon-dog valley. And then Fudo-in is the name of this temple, and it's a temple dedicated to this deity, Fudo-myo. And I actually have my pilgrim's jacket. I'm a big fan of this deity, Fudo-myo. And on the back is, there he is, the man himself. And he's actually quite commonly found in Japan, and he's very easy to recognize. So if you memorize these features, you already will know that you're looking at Fudo-myo. He always has this flaming halo, which burns away our delusion. And in his right hand, he always carries a sword, and in his left hand, a kind of lasso. And when you look at his face, he looks like a quite wrathful, angry fellow, but actually he's on our side. He's like a very strict parent, making sure that we stick on the straight and narrow when we're practicing Buddhism. And since we're here at a Fudo-myo temple today, I shall don my pilgrim's jacket. And perhaps you can also see behind me the main hall, which is perched on these stilts. And you can see the banner at the top with these 5 colours. And you'll often see these coloured banners in Japan, and also in wider Asia as well. These are the colours of the International Buddhist flag, and there's one colour for each of the 5 elements in Buddhist cosmological theory. So you've got earth, air, fire, water, and ether, or space. So perhaps if you've been to Tibet or Nepal or one of those regions, you might have seen the kind of Tibetan prayer flags, which also follow the same colour scheme. And one great thing about this temple is that even before the coronavirus pandemic, it's always so incredibly quiet as it is today, being slightly removed from the centre of Kyoto. So let's enjoy walking through this wonderful, quite special feeling place.
Yeah, as Farmer said, this is a super peaceful temple. And one thing I do want to point out, a characteristic, is you can see the charred remains in front of you. That is from recently they had their yearly fire walk festival, where you can walk through the fire and help purify yourself using Fudo-myo's fire. So it's a real interesting temple festival that they do have here. Another thing that is a characteristic of this temple, which Farmer talked about before, was the tanuki of the Tanukidani. These are raccoon dogs. You'll see these statues everywhere in Japan. Usually it may be in front of some merchant places, but a tanuki is a real animal in Japan. It's a raccoon dog. They typically don't wear hats or have jugs of sake, but you'll see them. They're basically tricksters. This is a characterized version of them. They're tricksters in mythology, and they have their sake with them. They like to party, but one thing they do have characteristics of, you can see, they do have comically large testicles, and they use those testicles to, again, party. They can use them as drums to call their friends. They can also use them as a glider of sorts to glide from the trees. We could talk about tanuki and testicles all day, but we probably shouldn't. Let's go back to Farmer to talk about this unique god.
Yeah, I can't promise that things are going to get any less PG-13 here, actually, because what we have here, just pin this up. So this quite unassuming little shrine here, so it's a very small little shrine within this wider temple grounds, is dedicated to another myo, another wisdom king. So like Fudo-myo on my back, but a slightly less commonly found one. His name is Usu-sama Myo, and it actually says here what he's the god of. And it says he's the god of the toilet. Quite interesting, and you can't really see him inside here. It's a little bit hard to make out, but I actually have what's called an ofuda. And this is a kind of slip of, like a sacred talisman that you can buy here at the temple. It only costs about £3 or £4, and it actually has Usu-sama Myo himself. He always has this characteristic one leg up pose. And he was originally a god of removing impurities. And if you ask yourself, where is potentially the most impure or dirty place within a house, then probably you would have to say the toilet or the bathroom. And so gradually over time, Ususama Myo, a god of removing impurities, became a god of the toilet. And it even says that on here, talisman for the toilet. So you buy this and then you take it home and put it in a high place in your toilet or bathroom, and then he will look after everything that happens within that room and make sure it's all hassle-free. Very handy. Okay. And we've actually started from within the temple and are kind of moving down towards the base of the valley. And you can see here this very big staircase. There are 250 steps to get up to this temple. Many temples and shrines in Japan are located on the top of small mountains. Religion in Japan requires effort for results. And perhaps maybe you can already make out, as we move down these steps, on the right hand side at the bottom of this staircase there is a smaller temple building. And this is actually a building that has, working its way around it, a miniature version of the Shikoku 88 temple pilgrimage. So there are 4 main islands in Japan, and Shikoku is the smallest of those 4 islands. And for hundreds of years there has been a pilgrimage route that links 88 temples that run around the circumference of Shikoku. It's about 1,200 kilometers. And the traditional way of completing that pilgrimage, visiting each temple along the way, was to walk. And people still walk it now, although it takes around 6 to 8 weeks to walk. Really quite challenging. But these days it's actually quite common for people to do it by car. And people say that that's still doing the pilgrimage. It's cheating slightly, but it's still valid. And actually I have completed the pilgrimage, but I have to admit I did it by car. But at least once during my life I would like to give it another go on foot. And you'll see many people in Shikoku wearing very similar jackets to the one that I put on a moment ago, white pilgrim's jackets, as they complete the pilgrimage.
That's right. One thing about the Japanese, which you'll realize, is that they love their shortcuts. And so like Farmer said, the 88 Shikoku pilgrimage does have 88 temples that you visit. And the cool thing about this is a nice shortcut. And if you don't have time to do the 6-week walk, you can actually just come here and go in a clockwise direction through here, and you can actually go underneath all of these little torii gates and have done all the 88 temples, because at the base of these little monuments here is the dirt of all 88 temples. And so if you do kind of go through this little path here, you'll kind of basically touch all of the dirt of all the 88 temples. Again, a great shortcut. The Japanese are very fond of doing shortcuts. And again, not cheating, just a better way to do it. I mean, there's another example is there are various sutra houses around different temples, which house literally hundreds of thousands, millions of pages of scrolls of sutra, and it could take you many, many lifetimes to read all of them. And so, of course, you don't want to do that, right? So what you can do is, again, kind of go in a clockwise position, kind of rub your hand around these special sections here, and the information from the scrolls will go from your hands, your fingers, into your head. And so, again, you've done it. And it's a great way to get all the knowledge in the world. And because we're doing this for you now, you've come with us on this journey this far in this tour. You've now done the 88 pilgrimage walk, and you've been blessed, so you are welcome.
Yeah, one common theme that runs through Japanese religion is what's known as Genzei Ryaku, which means this worldly benefits. And so, of course, Buddhism in Japan has, of course, teachings regarding life after death and so on. But actually, for people's everyday lives, the main reason why people visit temples and shrines in Japan is for this worldly benefits, things that they need in the here and now. And so there are specific temples and shrines that have specific benefits. And actually one benefit that this particular temple offers is traffic safety. So a little bit further down this mountain, there's a separate area of the temple that offers drive-through car blessings. Very handy thing when you buy a new car. And then perhaps you can just make out the statue here. This is a man called Kukai, also known by his posthumous name, Kobo Daishi. And he's a hugely important figure in the history of Japanese Buddhism. He was the founder of the Shingon sect of Buddhism. And earlier we were at a Zen temple, which is, I think, more well known outside of Japan. But actually in Japan, Shingon is just as big in terms of the number of temples and adherents. And this guy, Kukai, was the founder. And here people buy these small amulets in the shape of waraji, like traditional Japanese sandals, and they tie them to Kukai's legs in the hopes that he will grant them the benefit of having strong and healthy legs and knees. So anyone that suffers from knee problems will come here and buy one of these and attach it to Kukai, Kobo Daishi. And I mentioned Shingon Buddhism. So Zen, as I mentioned earlier at Nanzen-ji, it's the type of Buddhism in Japan that places the most emphasis on seated meditation as the main practice. But Shingon Buddhism is a little bit different. Shingon Buddhism is often termed esoteric Buddhism, which means secret Buddhism. And what that means is that there are specific practices within Shingon Buddhism, specifically mudras, sacred hand gestures, mantras, kind of sacred utterances, and a specific type of meditation, visualization meditation. And these practices are secretly transmitted from master to disciple. And they love fire. And this is why Fudo-myo is so often seen at Shingon temples. Fire rituals of various types are very commonly encountered at Shingon temples.
Coming up here, I do want to talk about the Shichifuku, the 7 lucky gods here in Japan, which again you'll see everywhere. They have to do with various different characteristics. They are an amalgamation kind of Chinese gods as well as Indian gods, and then there's that one Japanese god to kind of round it out. But they are interesting in that they do have what was my favorite 3 to talk about. Let's talk about these guys here, these 3. And so you have the woman with the lute is Benzaiten, and she's basically the goddess of beauty and art and everything just kind of nice. And then you have the guy behind him with the hammer. That's Daikoku-den. He's the god of wealth and luck. He has that hammer. If you rub his hammer, it's good luck. You might get a bunch of money. The Japanese lottery system, if you ever buy a lottery ticket at a little booth, they have a statue of Daikoku-den. You can rub his hammer and definitely win the lottery. And then this guy right here with the fishing pole, that is Ebisu, my favorite god. He's the god of fishing. He's the only Japanese god, but he's the god of fishing. But that's kind of cool. And, art is cool and beauty is cool, but he also is famous because he's the mascot of Ebisu beer. So definitely the most important god out of all of these. I think Richard would agree.
Absolutely. And actually, I had a friend that worked for Ebisu beer in Japan, and she said that Ebisu beer is the only beer in Japan that doesn't give you a hangover.
Not true.
Not true.
Not true.
I think she was somewhat biased working there. And so we're now coming pretty much to the end of the staircase that leads out of Tanukidani. And I just wanted to point out these gates, because perhaps you thought you had it all figured out, that red shrine gates equals Shinto shrine, where we started, for example, at Fushimi Inari. So why are there red shrine gates here at a Buddhist temple? And actually this was the standard in Japan all the way through to the late 19th century. As soon as Buddhism had been introduced to Japan in the 6th century, straight away Buddhism and Shinto started to become kind of amalgamated together, combined practice, and that remained the case right the way through to the 19th century. But in the 19th century, the government tried to separate the two, the separation of kami and Buddhas, but temples like this just go to show how unsuccessful trying to unravel centuries of tradition can be in Japan. And so now it's not uncommon to find within a Buddhist temple a Shinto shrine. And this temple in particular is famous for the practice of Shugendo, which is a kind of mountain aesthetic religion, which combines kind of mountain worship and also Shinto and Buddhism. One of the best examples that you can see of this combined form of practice that's so prevalent in Japan. And people in Japan, they don't exclusively belong to one or another religion. So it's often said that in Japan you're born Shinto, get married Christian, and die Buddhist. And that's no problem in Japan. Just whatever you need. So even though Japan only has a Christian population of about 1.7%, many people still choose to have a Christian-style wedding because it looks cool to wear a lovely white dress. But many people also combine it with a Shinto wedding held within the same week. Quite interesting. And then here we just finish at the entrance here to Tanukidani Fudo-in. You can see many more of these Tanuki statues. And I'll just hop back in front of the camera. And thank you very much for joining us through some of our favourite spots in Kyoto today. I hope you've enjoyed seeing some of the well-known areas and then some real hidden treasures like Tanukidani here. And there's so much more. We've just scratched the surface today. So when you do come to Japan, we really hope you'll join us for a tour of Kyoto. There's so much we'd love to show you and we can't wait to see you. And Brett's holding the camera at the moment, but goodbye from Brett as well. Microphone.
See you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much, and thank you for watching.